Hi, with Peter Carr and Scott Stewart on LTV's The Research Channel. Well, there's been some dark days in recent weeks in the area of cloud at the enterprise level. We've seen outages from Amazon and Sony, so Scott's probably a good opportunity to talk through some of the specific issues related to that, so we can really understand what went on.
Yeah, absolutely. Been some very interesting developments, as many of us would have seen in the Twitter and obviously the press around Amazon and hash fail. In other words, Amazon having a very significant outage in the US, which actually affected a lot of a number of Australian operations as well, particularly with online websites. Mm-hmm. And so it certainly does remind us, I guess, that even with cloud, vendors will fail, data centers will go down, networks will stop, and it highlights that CIOs really need to consider their SLAs and consider the issues even with cloud. So it was a good reminder.
So it's probably cloud aside, data centers have been failing for as long as they've been around, and the most recent one, of course, being Westpac, which took down the big network for that bank and its customers for the best part of half a day. Now that one was actually attributed to an air conditioning fault, so that's pretty scary. And I guess so, aside from the fact that these outages happen, given that this one was wrapped up in this topic of cloud, probably gives it a few more hairs. Yes. Given a lot of organisations are really still very risk averse about that model. So if we look specifically at Amazon, we can talk about what the specific failure was quickly. But we recently completed our Trusted Infrastructure as a Service vendor ranking, and in that particular study, we ranked Amazon's EC2 offering, I think 18 out of 58. So they did okay, but certainly as a trusted provider of infrastructure as a service offerings, they certainly weren't the highest. And if I look back and think about what they were really good at, their self-service module or API was very strong, except things like obviously management support, 0.
Yes.
They've got 1 data center worldwide, so if it goes down, it goes down.
Yeah.
So from a geo commitment perspective for Australian organisations, I think we kind of rated them probably among the lowest of the enterprise organisations.
Yeah. I think it brings into mind the question. For instance, a vendor claims that we have elasticity, right? So how do you actually test that? How do you develop a standard or a mechanism to really measure how effective that elasticity is? Because in this case, it actually, they didn't have it. So their mirror virtualizations failed,
right?
And their kind of availability zones became an issue.
So when we talk about their mirror virtualization failing, so that elasticity that clients are looking for to actually expand their footprint for infrastructure capacity on demand.
Yes.
So were there a number of organisations who were looking to do that simultaneously, or just this underlying function within the Amazon offering failed?
Yeah, I think there was a number of domino effect type issues that they had, and without diving too deep into the technology side of it, I think what it is for some of their bigger customers, some of the big players, that was a peak in the demand, and that's when they experienced a whole flow-on effect of failures.
Yeah. So for an organisation that was or still is an Amazon client, in that report we also ranked them quite low in terms of their service level agreements. I think we gave them a rating of 1 out of 5. So there would have been a lot of organisations who felt the pain of not just having an outage, but having no recourse or mitigation strategies with their service provider. So what are some of the considerations then for CIOs?
Well, I think just on that point, I think it's interesting that a lot of the providers, the customers who are using Amazon as a provider, had to basically put the sign up on their website saying unavailable, and please contact us directly. Yeah. And in these sort of types of scenarios, customers are expecting better information, better insights into when things are going to be up again, and I think that there was a bit of a problem there in that. By contrast, Westpac, you mentioned earlier, there's been a lot of comment that they actually handled the actual downtime very well. In other words, it was all hands on deck on Twitter. There was lots of information flowing, lots of help, and as a result, a lot of comment was, well, at least Westpac were telling us what's going on. So I thought, and it also highlights the whole social media aspect too, as well, of PR, and how you need to sort of step into that whole social media realm.
So for clients of Amazon, or just for CIOs who have moved some of their core or non-core applications to the cloud, something like this has happened, then obviously there's the DR component for next time. Obviously they're not going to get improved service level agreements with Amazon. So what are some of the considerations then?
Yeah, I think that that this did highlight some of the gaps in the SLAs. A lot of people, who had an outage pulled out the SLA and realised that they actually weren't covered. So that's an interesting point around due diligence on your SLA. I think having a plan B, and C and D, you must, particularly with online client data, client experience, you must be able to, have a failover type scenario, which is difficult. And I think that with cloud and with applications, I think that we're going to have to get to the point where applications will need to be developed to be agnostic to the platform. So they'll need to be aware of the network. Amazon's gone down. We need to switch to platform X, platform Y. And I think that there is some work emerging in that sort of space where applications are going to be able to run across any platform and all platforms.
But with that stuff, we're really talking about the emergence of common standards across the cloud industry, right? And we're probably, what we're seeing so far is the evolution of specific platforms, as opposed to, there's obviously there is work going on in terms of interoperability, but that's probably something that's deep in the shadows of enlightenment at the moment, as opposed to reality.
Yeah, it just kind of highlights that really, we're still dealing with an immature market in that space, particularly when we talk about standards.
Okay, so that's enterprise cloud. The other highly public incident to do with the cloud was Sony.
Yeah.
So let's just quickly touch on that and how that was different.
Yeah, I think that's more worrying because here's a concerted attack by hackers to, they use social engineering, were able to get to an administrator of the network who installed an application, and then bang, they were in, SQL injection. So to me that's very worrying because it's not just one, it's also affected the other Sony network as well with the video online. So 70 million users, access to credit card details. Was the data encrypted? Yes, maybe. Have they got credit card details? And it sort of really is quite concerning around.
So the core thing here is really that it was human failure as opposed to technology.
Yes.
And I guess that's been the underlying premise of every Hollywood blockbuster for the last 100 years, right? That human error, someone in a black hat comes in and takes over and brings down large capital markets based on their access to core systems.
Absolutely. So. Yeah, and the social engineering aspect is why is the way that these hackers are really it's a very effective weapon, and it's also difficult to guard against. And so I think that I was asked by media, is this going to kill cloud computing? Is this going to what's the impact that Amazon and Sony are going to have? And I think it definitely will slow the adoption. I think it will highlight the risk. I think that it will definitely create more questions about, should we be doing this? And
well, it takes us back 10 years, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If you go back to the turn of the century, we're all concerned about putting our credit card details online. So we really have taken 10 years backward steps, like in terms of this whole in terms of this whole market. But my top line thinking is that essentially the underlying technology and the concept of cloud is still very sound.
Yes.
Obviously vulnerable to attack, but part of this is the due diligence that organisations must undertake in terms of assessing not only their SLAs but other contractual obligations with their suppliers. Restitution is going to be a significant one, and even at a consumer level, Sony's probably opened itself up to a traditional class action insurance claim case against an employee that has misbehaved.
That's right. And you think about, okay, so we have this problem, we have data that's offshore and it's at risk. So what does the government do? And what they do is they go, well, we'll make the directors of the company responsible for any breaches. So at the end of the day, even though the vendors can say, look, cloud computing is safe, and it is, we kind of know that it has a lot of very good controls. If you if you go into a cloud data center, you'll see security like you've never seen before. But with the sort of social engineering aspect, you have to account that something will happen, and something has happened. And so the risk is that if there is a breach, then the directors of the company will be liable, and that's the customer, you know, the end corporation who's storing that data overseas.
Right, and so director liability for cloud is certainly the topic of the day at the moment, and for anyone who hasn't read it, Scott's written a very popular blog on that topic, which has had thousands of hits in its first in its first week. So for anyone interested in more detail on that director liability issue, then go there. I think the bottom line on the Sony issue, though, is that I don't see the Sony breach halting the march of the Apple iPhone, iPad, and its synchronicity with iTunes and the application store and people putting their data and credit card data into these particular sources. The world will march on.
Yes,
what it's doing is, you know, and history will show that these events become core inflection point in the maturity and maturing of these markets.
Yeah, and I think it'll be interesting to see, you know, Sony are rebuilding that network now, so they're having to kind of go back to the drawing board and think, okay, what are we going to do? So it'll be interesting to see what changes that will bring into play, and there might be new encryption technologies, there might be new RSA type techniques, you know, that before you can, you know, register your credit card details, you have to do an extra step.
Yeah.
And I think that people will probably do it because they want the benefit of what this facility is, but they also want their details to be secure.
Yeah. So for Sony, this is the Louisiana Gulf oil spill that BP had.
Yeah,
that's the equivalent for our industry. And what we'll see come out the other end is a battered and bruised BP. We'll see a battered and bruised Sony, but potentially, should their pockets be deep enough, some very robust infrastructure to come out the other end.
Yes.
So, you know, we'll probably look back on this in 5 years and marvel at how far Sony has come in this particular space.
Let's hope so, yeah.